The year is 1972. The world watches as the Olympic Games unfold in Munich. On May 31st, Lufthansa Flight 649 prepared for takeoff from Bombay, India. On board were 172 souls, unaware of the terror ahead. The Boeing 747 soared into the evening sky. A clandestine group harbored a sinister plan. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine saw an opportunity. Their objective was bold: hijack the plane and take hostages. The world watched in horror as the events unfolded. The 1970s marked a turning point in history, a decade grappling with the escalating threat of terrorism. The world watched, aghast, as extremist groups resorted to increasingly audacious acts of violence to achieve their political aims. Hijackings, bombings, and kidnappings became tragically commonplace, casting a long shadow over international travel and plunging the world into an era of fear and uncertainty. The specter of terrorism haunted airports and public spaces as governments struggled to respond to this new and evolving threat. Security measures were hastily implemented, intelligence agencies worked tirelessly to track down terrorist cells, and the world held its breath, bracing for the next attack. The hijacking of Lufthansa Flight 649 was not an isolated incident but rather a terrifying symptom of a much larger crisis. The PFLP, fueled by anger over the displacement of Palestinians and frustrated by the lack of progress in peace negotiations, sought to force the world to acknowledge their plight. They believed that by hijacking a plane and holding its passengers hostage, they could exert pressure on Western governments and extract concessions. Their tactics were brutal, their demands non-negotiable: the release of imprisoned comrades and a hefty ransom. As the world grappled with the implications of this new era of terrorism, the passengers and crew of Lufthansa Flight 649 became pawns in a deadly game of political chess. They were innocent bystanders, thrust into a maelstrom of violence and fear, their lives held hostage to the demands of terrorists and the desperate efforts of governments to secure their release. Their ordeal would become a chilling reminder of the human cost of extremism and the enduring threat of terrorism in the modern world. The air thrummed with languages and laughter at Bombay's bustling airport. The departure lounge for Lufthansa Flight 649 buzzed with energy. Families shepherded excited children clutching colorful toys. Businessmen spoke in hushed tones, faces etched with weariness. Young couples stole shy glances, fingers intertwined. Seasoned travelers navigated the chaos with practiced ease. Each passenger carried a unique story, a tapestry of dreams. Outside, the Boeing 747 awaited, a symbol of progress. Amidst the throng of eager travelers, a group of men moved with a quiet purpose. They were members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, driven by a fierce determination. Their faces, unsmiling and watchful, scanned the crowd, concealing deadly weapons. The PFLP had chosen Lufthansa Flight 649 as their target. Their demands were steep: the release of imprisoned comrades and a hefty ransom. As they boarded the aircraft, they carried the potential to unleash chaos and terror. The hijacking would become a stark reminder of the vulnerability of civilian life. Despite the air of excitement and anticipation that permeated the cabin, a few passengers couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Perhaps it was a fleeting look exchanged between the unsmiling men who had boarded last, their eyes hard and watchful, their hands never straying far from their jackets. A young mother clutched her child a little tighter, her eyes darting nervously around the cabin. An elderly gentleman felt a chill run down his spine, his gaze lingering on the group of men seated across the aisle. These whispers of premonition were quickly dismissed as travel anxiety. The passengers settled into their seats, their anxieties soothed by the familiar routines of air travel. The engines roared to life, their powerful vibrations coursing through the cabin. As the wheels lifted off the ground, carrying them skyward, none could have imagined the harrowing ordeal that awaited them. As Lufthansa Flight 649 ascended through the darkening skies, the city of Bombay shrinking below, a subtle shift occurred within the plane's metal confines. The initial excitement of takeoff gave way to a quiet hum of anticipation. Stewardesses navigated the aisles with practiced grace, offering refreshments and warm smiles. Yet, an undercurrent of unease lingered, imperceptible to most. The group of men scattered throughout the cabin remained strangely aloof. The young mother, her intuition piqued, found herself unable to shake off a feeling of foreboding. The elderly gentleman found his gaze drawn repeatedly to the men seated across the aisle. Unbeknownst to the unsuspecting passengers and crew, the hands of fate were already in motion. The clock ticked past midnight, casting the cabin in an eerie, hushed darkness. Most passengers had succumbed to the gentle lull of the engines, their heads resting against pillows, their dreams carrying them far from the confines of the aircraft. Only a handful remained awake, their reading lights casting small pools of illumination in the otherwise darkened cabin. It was in this moment of deceptive tranquility that the carefully constructed facade of normalcy shattered. With a suddenness that sent shockwaves through the aircraft, the group of men sprung from their seats, their movements swift and coordinated, their faces now contorted in expressions of fierce determination. The glint in their eyes, once merely a figment of the elderly gentleman's imagination, now burned with chilling clarity, reflecting the cold, hard reality of their intentions. Gone were the nondescript passengers, replaced by the chilling visage of terrorists, their true purpose revealed. Shouts pierced the stillness, guttural and chilling, as the hijackers brandished their weapons, their voices echoing with an unsettling mix of authority and desperation. The terrifying sight of guns and grenades, stark and incongruous amidst the mundane comforts of the aircraft cabin, jolted the passengers awake, their eyes widening in disbelief as the terrifying reality of the situation sunk in. Panic, raw and primal, rippled through the aircraft like a virus. Screams erupted from the passengers, their voices a cacophony of fear and confusion. The young mother, her worst fears realized, clutched her child protectively to her chest, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The elderly gentleman, his premonitions transformed into a living nightmare, felt a cold dread grip his heart, the world tilting on its axis as the hijackers seized control of the aircraft. In the confined space of the cockpit, the captain and his co-pilot, veterans of countless takeoffs and landings, found themselves facing a situation unlike any they had ever encountered. The familiar routine of flight, the comforting hum of instruments, the reassuring glow of the control panel, all faded into insignificance as a chilling message crackled over the intercom, shattering the calm of the cockpit. "We have control of the aircraft. Do as you are told, and no one will get hurt." The voice, flat and emotionless, sent a shiver down the captain's spine. He exchanged a look with his co-pilot, their eyes reflecting a shared sense of disbelief and growing alarm. Years of training, countless hours logged in the air, had prepared them for mechanical failures, for inclement weather, for a myriad of potential emergencies. But nothing in their experience had prepared them for this, the cold, calculating threat of terrorism. Through the small, reinforced cockpit door, they could hear the muffled sounds of chaos erupting in the cabin, the panicked shouts of passengers, the chilling commands of the hijackers. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on their shoulders. The lives of 172 souls rested in their hands, their fate intertwined with the decisions they made in the next few terrifying hours. With a sinking feeling, the captain knew they had no choice but to comply. To resist, to challenge the hijackers, would be to gamble with the lives entrusted to their care. They were now pawns in a deadly game, their aircraft transformed into a flying prison, their every move dictated by the whims of the men who held the lives of their passengers hostage. The hijackers asserted their dominance, transforming the atmosphere into one of fear and uncertainty. The hijackers patrolled the aisles, their weapons a constant reminder of the precariousness of the situation. Whispers of fear snaked through the cabin, carrying fragments of information and speculation. The young mother, her child trembling in her arms, fought back tears, her every instinct screaming at her to protect her child. The elderly gentleman, his face pale but resolute, offered words of comfort to those around him. Passengers huddled together, seeking solace in shared fear, their whispered prayers a desperate plea for deliverance. The hijackers revealed their identities and cause, declaring themselves soldiers for Palestinian liberation. They were members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or PFLP. Their message, delivered with conviction, echoed through the tense cabin. They spoke of years of oppression and the struggle for a homeland. For many passengers, the name PFLP held little meaning, but now they were forced to confront the harsh realities of the conflict. The hijackers' demands were non-negotiable: the release of their comrades and a hefty ransom. The hijackers laid out their demands with chilling precision. Their primary objective was the release of imprisoned comrades. Their second demand was a hefty ransom of $5 million. To emphasize the seriousness, the hijackers set a deadline, adding unbearable pressure. The hijackers played on the passengers' fears, their every word calculated to instill obedience. They were determined to maintain control, ensuring their demands were met, no matter the cost. News of the hijacking quickly reached the outside world, sending shockwaves through governments and media outlets. The image of Lufthansa Flight 649 transformed into a potent symbol of vulnerability. From CNN to the United Nations, the story unfolded in a flurry of breaking news alerts. Governments scrambled to gather information and formulate a response. For the families of the passengers, the news arrived like a punch to the gut. The hijacking was a wake-up call for a world grappling with the growing threat of terrorism. Time seemed to warp within the hijacked aircraft, stretching into an agonizing eternity. The initial shock gave way to a numbing routine, every interaction with the hijackers sending shivers down the passengers' spines. The air, heavy with the stench of sweat and fear, became almost unbearable. The passengers clung to whatever shreds of normalcy they could find. The young mother sang lullabies to drown out the sounds of fear and despair. The elderly gentleman shared stories of resilience and hope. Amidst the fear, glimmers of hope flickered, acts of kindness emerging from the darkness. As the aircraft remained grounded, the cabin became a sweltering pressure cooker of fear and frustration. The hijackers, their initial bravado giving way to edginess, paced the aisles with increasing agitation. The passengers bore the brunt of the hijackers' mounting frustration. Small acts of defiance were met with swift retribution. The young mother struggled to shield her child from the escalating tension. The elderly gentleman found solace in quiet acts of compassion. The once comforting interior of the aircraft had transformed into a tinderbox, a spark away from chaos. The silence that descended upon the aircraft was an insidious form of torture. The hum of the engines had fallen silent, leaving a void filled only by the ticking of the clock. The hijackers severed all lines of communication, wary of any attempts to communicate with the outside world. The lack of information gnawed at the passengers' sanity. Rumors spread through the cabin like wildfire. The weight of silence pressed down on them, amplifying their fears. They were adrift in a sea of uncertainty, their fates held hostage to the whims of their captors. The hijackers allowed snippets of information to filter through, fueling a roller coaster of emotions. News of ongoing negotiations sent surges of relief, followed by crushing disappointment. The hijackers used these pronouncements as a weapon, keeping the passengers off balance. Rumors of the German government paying the ransom sent a collective sigh of relief, followed by anger as the news proved premature. The families' pleas for the safe return of their loved ones added complexity to the negotiations. The passengers clung to every word, their emotions stretched taut, their resilience tested with each passing day. Days turned into a seemingly endless procession of sunrises and sunsets, each one a stark reminder of the passengers' continued confinement. Just when their spirits had dwindled to their lowest point, a flicker of hope emerged. The ransom, $5 million, had been paid. Relief washed over the passengers, dispelling the oppressive tension. The hijackers allowed themselves a rare moment of celebration. For the passengers, the news came tempered with caution. The announcement that the ransom had been paid ushered in a new form of torment for the weary passengers of Lufthansa Flight 649, the agonizing wait for their release. The hijackers, flush with their perceived victory, became increasingly unpredictable, their moods shifting with the desert winds, their promises of freedom as ephemeral as mirages shimmering on the distant horizon. The stifling heat of the Aden Desert seemed to intensify the already unbearable tension within the aircraft's metal confines, their fingers never straying far from their weapons. Her lullabies, once a source of comfort, now carried a note of desperation, his voice a beacon of calm amidst the storm of uncertainty. Another day, another night, had passed without any sign of release. Promises had been made, deadlines set, and yet they remained prisoners. their threats more menacing, their grip on reality seemingly loosening with each passing hour. Section 3. Freedom's Price, the Release and its Aftermath. As dawn broke over the desolate landscape, a sense of weary anticipation settled over the passengers and crew of Lufthansa Flight 649. One by one, the passengers, their faces etched with relief and disbelief, shuffled down the aircraft's steps and onto the tarmac. The physical release marked the beginning of a long journey back to a world forever altered by their experience. The hijacking of Lufthansa Flight 649 would reverberate through history, a cautionary tale of the impact of terrorism. The wheels of the Lufthansa jet kissed the tarmac in Frankfurt, Germany, marking the end of a harrowing journey. The passengers and crew carried with them the invisible scars of trauma. The transition from hostages to survivors was fraught with challenges. The world now felt fragile, the specter of terror lurking in everyday life. Boarding an airplane evoked fear and anxiety. Vivid flashbacks to the hijacking haunted them, their senses dulled by emotional exhaustion. Yet the human spirit finds a way to heal and grow. The road to recovery was paved with the support of loved ones and fellow survivors. They emerged forever changed, but ultimately triumphant. Section 2. Elusive Justice, the Hunt for the Hijackers. The hunt for the perpetrators of this audacious act of terrorism intensified. The hijackers vanished into the labyrinthine streets of Aden with their $5 million ransom. The world demanded justice, their calls echoing through international law enforcement agencies. A global manhunt ensued, a desperate race against time. Interpol issued arrest warrants, their descriptions circulated globally. Intelligence agencies worked tirelessly to connect the dots and trace the flow of money. Despite their efforts, the hijackers seemed to melt into the ether. The investigation became bogged down in political complexities and dead ends. The families of the victims were left to grapple with the lack of closure. The case of the Lufthansa Flight 649 hijacking remains a stark reminder of the challenges faced by law enforcement. The hijackers became symbols of the elusive nature of justice. The hijacking of Lufthansa Flight 649, etched into aviation history, marked a world grappling with terrorism. The Boeing 747, once a symbol of ingenuity, became a reminder of civilian vulnerability. The world faced the reality that nowhere was truly safe. Airports overhauled security, introducing metal detectors and baggage scanners. Air travel took on a somber tone, with heightened vigilance and fear. Governments grappled with combating terrorism on a global scale. The world entered a new era of international cooperation and conflict. The legacy of Lufthansa Flight 649 serves as a reminder of the human cost of extremism and the power of resilience.